So I have two heroes for our fall event, and now I'm going to introduce you to our second hero by the name of Elizabeth Haynes. And I think you said at one time you like to be called Beth, but I'm using the formal thing because I'm so in awe of you. So anyway, there are so many descriptions behind your name also, just like Julia Brown had so many. But here are some of the few brilliant clips from her bio. So Miss Haynes has more than 30 years of experience as both an employer and or an employee of the volunteer organizations in California, Michigan, and Canada. Am I correct on that? All three states, maybe some more states.
States and country.
And countries. And you used to live close to Canada, so you were active in Canada as well. You were active in you were their professionally registered parliamentarian for the Canadian Federation of University Women. She has held many AAUW positions of leadership in her local branch, Michigan, California, and whatever other states you've lived in, right? So anyway, you are a national board member. You were the National Governance Board Chair. So the governance system is organized to be a helpful liaison between AAUW National and the local leaders. This board helps streamline and organize AAUW groups into alternative structures and leadership, especially for the small branches who are struggling to subsist in their declining numbers. We need your help, Elizabeth, and I think we're going to get a few answers here. So carry on.
Thank you, Joan. I'm just going to put a screen share up. So I really liked your topic, your theme for your leadership conference today. It fits in line with many of the things that I have done with AAUW over the years. And for those of you who have been involved in bylaw amendments and bylaw rewrites over the last 5 years, yes, I am the governance chair who you all hated, because I am the person who said, after we told you all to write your bylaws to match a template, after a year of that, I said, stop, don't do any more. Those of you who have done it, thank you, but we're going to change everything again. And so I was chair when we did the original restatement of the AAUW bylaws. So today, as Joan said, we're going to talk about right-sizing a branch and looking at branch leadership. Julia stole some of my thunder, but that's okay. We'll move on from that. Carolyn, could you launch the poll? So Julia probably already gave you all this information, and you know the answer for this first poll question, which is, which leadership positions does AAUW require? Please check all that you think apply. And if nothing else, we'll know how many of you were actually listening to Julia's presentation. So please take some time to answer the poll. And Carolyn, let me know when you feel like we've had a good number of answers, and then you can tell me what we got.
Still going.
Okay. It's amazing how long 10 or 20 seconds can take when you're sitting in silence, and how short it seems when we think of it in the grand scheme of things.
Okay, it looks like it's done now.
Okay.
So you want me to go through what each one said?
Can you post the results?
I'm not sure. Let me just see. I end the poll. Do I end the poll
You
first?
end the poll and then it should let you share results.
There we go. Got
There
it.
we go. Okay, so all of you thought that we need a president. Well, this was maybe a little bit of a trick question because that may or may not be correct. 21% of you thought we need a recording secretary. 91% of you knew we need a VP of finance or a finance person. And some of you thought that we need a funds director, a policy director, a CU director, and a DEI director. You can go ahead and close that and take it off the screen now. So it is correct we need a leader or administrative officer. The administrative officer does not need to be the president. It can be the administrative officer. I'm in an organization. Joan alluded to the fact that I've been involved in the Canadian Federation of University Women. And in my local club, we have clubs, not branches, but in my local club, I am the CFUW Canada GWI liaison. So my job is to keep informed on what IFUW, which is now called GWI, is doing and what CFUW is doing, and serve as the administrative officer for that club. So the administrative officer doesn't need to be called a president, but you do need an administrative officer. And you do need somebody who's going to be in charge of your finances. These are the two offices that AAUW requires. You should have a means of keeping, you must have a means of keeping all your records. Does that have to be one person assigned as the recording secretary? No. It could be that your administrative officer is the keeper of the records and that each meeting somebody is asked to take the minutes. I used to have a minutes template that I would hand to somebody when the meeting started and say, would you please take minutes? And that template had the whole agenda written out and known motions that were going to come up. I had those written in so that all had to be done was write who the mover, the seconder was, and whether it was adopted or not. So when we start thinking about right-sizing a branch, we need to think about why we're doing it. So the common complaints tend to be, how do we attract new or younger members? We can't fill our leadership roles, and members won't attend or participate in mission-based activities. So then it's time to start thinking about establishing a branch structure that will help you accomplish your branch goals as well as national goals, build in sustainability for the future, prevent volunteer burnout. When we have large boards in small branches, we're asking the same people to carry on these roles year after year after year, and volunteer burnout can happen. Plan for the future and engage members. So what does it mean to right size the structure? Marshaling available resources for maximum impact. That's my definition anyway. So as we said, we want to attract new members. That means that we need to provide programs that are interesting to the target audience. We want to fill our leadership roles. Well, how many leaders do you need? How often are you cycling through your members to fill those roles? And how often do you meet? Meeting potential audiences where they are. One of our problems, I think, is we want everything to stay as it has been ever since we began in this organization. Not all members or potential members want to participate in the way that we want to participate, particularly younger members who are very, very busy, don't want to attend monthly meetings to plan to do something. They do like to attend meetings that do something. So how do you make that happen if you're not having monthly meetings to plan to do that something? Well, there are ways to do it, and you might be able to promote younger people into those positions. Also, make sure your programming is something that is helpful to your current audience, but also interesting to a potential new audience. When you have programs on elder care, it's really important to some of us who are reaching the point where we might be needing elder care, or the point where our parents are needing elder care and we need to know what's there for them. But it may not be interesting to a 30-something who's worried about childcare issues more than elder care issues. So these are all things that we need to be aware of. When we look at leadership, how many leaders do you need? Well, we already confirmed that AAUW requires only 2 leaders, but many branches have, as Julia said, as many as 25 leaders. We have presidents, we have vice presidents of program, we have vice presidents of finance, we have secretaries, corresponding secretaries, historians, funds directors, public policy directors, CU directors, DEI directors, social directors. How many of these do you really need to make what you want to accomplish happen? And then we look at meetings. How many general meetings? Oh, let's launch another poll. How many general meetings do you think are required by AAUW? 1, 4, 6, 8, 12? How many meetings are required? Just pick one. Many branches hold meetings monthly from September to May or June. That's what they do. How are we doing on that poll, Carolyn? Some of you, 50% of you said we only need to hold 1 per year. 30% of you thought we should hold 4 meetings per year. 13% thought 6, 3% thought 8. There's actually no rule. You can go ahead and close that. There's actually no rule for how often we need to meet. It's up to you as a branch to decide how often you need to meet. So you can have those meetings 8 times a year if that's what works for your branch. Quarterly meetings are generally recommended by parliamentary authorities like Robert's Rules of Order. They're not required. One of the reasons we think we need to have them at least quarterly is if we're using motions like postpone, you can't refer past the quarterly time frame. But that doesn't mean that you have to have a meeting every quarter. Okay, let's launch the next one. What about board meetings? How many board meetings do we need to have a year? Many branches will hold their board meetings prior to each general meeting. Some branches have gone to just quarterly meetings. How many are we required to have? So this was a pretty quick one too, Carolyn, so you can probably close it out. Again, we have 48% of you thought we need to have at least 1 a year. 38% of you thought 4 per year. And you can go ahead and close that. It's a good idea to have at least 1 per year. But many branches have those that monthly from September to May and 1 to 2 in the summer for planning and turnover. How many of those meetings could be eliminated by giving assignments to committees rather than taking it on yourself? These are all things to keep in mind. So what are the AAUW requirements? We just went over leadership, 2 officers, an administrative officer, and a finance officer. You do need to have your records kept somewhere. If you're only going to have 2 officers, then one of them needs to be assigned those records. Meetings, there is absolutely no requirement, but you should figure out a schedule that works for what you want to accomplish. So let's think about what we need. What does your branch need? Well, that depends on what you want to do. It depends on how many members you have. Engaging members in projects is a powerful way to engage members in your branch success, but how many activities can you reasonably expect to accomplish? It's not a competition. Small branches can be as healthy as large branches, but what they do will look different. So if you have I got Joan to give me some stats, and she tells me that in Colorado, one branch has more than 200 members. When you have 200 members, you have a large pool of people to participate in planning. You have a pool of people to participate in making things happen. And you have a pool of people to help with fundraising and other things like that. You have 7 medium branches of 50 to 100 members. It's a little harder to do these things, but I've seen some very, very successful 100-member branches who have highly successful STEM activities for their school programs and various things like that. And then you have 3 smaller branches that are 20 to 30 members. So in a case like a smaller branch, it may be feasible to have quarterly meetings rather than monthly meetings. Or maybe an annual meeting is sufficient to bring together your interest groups, but to allow them and the committees to do the work of the programs that you want to accomplish. So decide how many meetings you need, how many membership meetings, and how many board meetings you need each year. And also how many interest groups you're going to have and what their activities are going to do. Does your program chair need to attend every board meeting, or can they meet a couple of times a year to plan the annual program and then turn the program over to the board? Can a public policy committee be ready to address emerging issues without being part of the monthly business meeting? And do you really need a social director? It's nice to have coffee at our meetings, but does it need to be somebody who attends every board meeting that's organizing it? So figure out what leadership you really need and what can be moved either into committees or simply taken off the board. At this point, if there are no questions in the chat or the Q&A, I'm not seeing any right now. I'm going to move on and show you a couple of sample models, alternative models. So the first one is a 3 to 5 member planning committee. I was a regional director for the Canadian Federation of University Women, and I had 14 clubs that were under me. One of them was really struggling, and they actually passed a motion to disband, only they didn't do it with notice, so the motion had to be reversed. And when that motion was reversed, we undertook, I served as a moderator to help them undertake a governance review and bylaw amendments. And they came up with the idea of a 5-member planning committee. Later, they reduced it to 3. But the planning committee, in this particular case, they had a membership chair and a finance director, a finance VP. And those seem to be really important roles to be filled, although you could combine finance and membership because the person who's receiving the dues can keep track of the members. But it seemed to be important also because those are the two that we always want to have somebody who's in charge of finance. But membership and privacy issues, it seemed like a really good person to have. They then had 3 members at large on their planning committee, and they rotated who would be the chair. I think I didn't advance my slide for you. Yes, I did. Okay, they rotated who would be the chair, and the person who was chairing their monthly meeting, they did not go to a fewer than 8 meetings per year model, but the person who was going to chair the monthly meeting was also in charge of chairing their monthly planning committee meeting, and and making sure that all the arrangements were made for their program. They had turned their program leadership into an ad hoc committee. So that's something that you can do to make sure this happens. Because after all, if you get together in the summer and you plan your program, you don't really need to be at those monthly meetings. You've got it all planned out. You have all the contact names. You can just pass it on to the planning committee to follow up with as you go along. So that 5-member committee worked really well for that club, and we've later implemented it in some other clubs, and branches of AAUW were presented with it as an idea. So it worked really well, and it is a way that you can downsize or right-size your leadership structure. An AAUW branch in Michigan actually has 12 presidents. They have the president of the month, and then they have a finance and a program VP. So the president of the month is in charge of making sure all the details are set for the monthly meeting, and handling any kinds of administrative duties that have to be done that month. They do assign one who will be the AAUW administrative officer, and they do keep really good records of what they're doing, but they don't have a traditional structure of president, vice president, program. Well, they do have the programs chair, but all the other board positions that tend to happen. So that is a model that is working for that particular branch. It's a relatively large branch. And the reason I bring this forward after we're talking about let's downsize our models is it shows you some ideas of ways that you can realign without following. It's thinking outside of the box. So this branch has found a way that has worked for them for almost 20 years now. But that doesn't mean it's the model that should be employed in every branch. Every branch is different. Every branch should think about what their needs are and how they can best meet them. And there's one other thing I want to talk about, and that's joining forces. So not necessarily in Colorado, but across the country, we know that we have a lot of really small branches. Some of them don't even have 5 dues paying members. They have a lot of life members, either honorary life or paid up life members. Can you sustain yourself if you don't have dues paying members? I don't know. So one way to deal with increasing the number of people that you have available as that pool of leaders and as that pool of worker bees is to join forces by one branch coming under the umbrella of another branch. So one branch would close and all the members would join this other branch that might be in an adjacent community, or in some cases even in the same community. The branch that has gone under the umbrella can maintain its identity as an interest group. It could be a interest group that's involved in local city politics that the other branch wouldn't necessarily be interested in. So that's one way of joining forces. Another way is to amalgamate, and that would be for 2 or more branches to actually close and create, oh, look at that, she typo on that, create one new branch. So these are interesting ways that we can be rethinking what we need and how we can accomplish what we want to do. Um, when you're thinking about joining forces, either through an umbrella program or through amalgamation. Oh, and I didn't state that another thing that the governance committee, the AAUW governance committee, is looking at is having states serve as the umbrella organizer for branches. So that's another way of doing the umbrella situation. Make sure that the branches negotiate and that on equal footing. Make sure that you ensure that all your monies from the individual branches are amicably and appropriately planned out how you're going to use them. If you have a scholarship fund for branch A that's coming under the umbrella of branch B, make sure that you have it written somewhere that that scholarship fund that goes to this particular high school will continue to be part of the planning and financial responsibilities of branch B so that that continues on. Make sure you include all members in the planning process and in leadership and in projects. You don't want branch A to feel like they've been silenced by coming under the umbrella of another branch. You don't want branch A, when it's an amalgamation, to feel like, well, we technically amalgamated, but they really aren't listening to us. And make sure you write detailed memoranda of understanding so that it's clearly written out.
Excuse me,
So,
Elizabeth, we're at
yeah.
about our end of our allotted time. If we've got 10 minutes for Q&A and only a couple of questions in the Q&A. If you'd like to keep going for a little bit, we can, or if you'd like to
Nope.
address some of those questions, take a look and
I'm
see.
actually at the end of my presentation.
Wow, cool. I
I'll
do see a
stop.
couple there at the end of the Q&A where you've got Phil Scram asking about how do you manage the workload if you have fewer leaders?
Right.
And Mary Korch has a question about training and informing incoming leaders. It sounds like we need to look at some development programs to make sure our leaders are ready to do whatever. So
Okay.
what
We'll
do you
start with managing the workload.
right?
The goal is not to just add more work to your administrative officer. The goal is to actually find ways to manage that workload. I'm a strong supporter of committees, and I think ad hoc committees can be very effective when you're dealing with projects or programs. So we have a committee that comes together for planning the equal pay day activities for our branch for this year. That's all they're going to do. They're going to choose how many times they're going to meet, and they're going to report back to the whatever your leadership structure is, and then they're going to report back rather regularly once they get started to the general membership at whatever meetings you have. And then once the equal pay day activity is over, they're done for that year and they disband, and you can appoint a new group, new committee the next year. So they're committees that are focused on a particular activity. They take on all the responsibilities for that activity, and the administrative officer and the finance officer are not overtaxed with making sure these things happen. It's on the committee to do that. As far as training and informing incoming leaders, a lot of the training is being handled at the state level in many states. If your state isn't doing that, then we can talk about ways to improve that. How they know what to do. We do have toolkits on the national website. Julia gave you some links for the DEI toolkit and for membership engagement, I think it was, and the funds. But there are toolkits on public policy and some of the other activities that are done. We have not done a lot of training of our administrative officers, but there are job descriptions on the website for what is the job that you're supposed to do. My experience is that coming in as a new leader in a branch, I've always had long-standing leaders who have mentored me where I've needed that mentoring. I actually became the president of AAUW co-president of Wyandotte Downriver in Michigan in less than 6 months of being a member of AAUW. That worked in that situation because I had been a long-standing president of a CFUW club. I knew how to be a president, and I also knew a lot about public policy and the different things that AAUW does because they're parallel organizations. So that did work. I wouldn't suggest bringing in somebody who is a 6-month member of AAUW as the president who did not already have some sort of similar experience, but you can do that. I think there are toolkits for membership directors on the website as well.
Yeah. And I feel some of what we've said before about letting go of that it has to be done exactly like we've done it in the past may make it easier for new leaders to come in and maybe adjust how they see the future of that role, perhaps. What do you think, Beth, about we mentioned the technical aspects. We have MailChimp, people who need to know programs that do mail and blasts and email stuff. And we have people who need to know how to frankly manage a website. And those are pretty technical skills. Do we need to start paying for that, or do we need to consider new ways of managing our technical needs?
I think this comes down to branch resources as well. I'll start with, don't be scared of MailChimp. I got thrown into Constant Contact. I got parachuted in as communications person on Constant Contact because the one who had been there was necessarily retired. It turns out that it's really not that different than writing an email. There are a few things that you have to learn, but MailChimp and Constant Contact have great tutorials on them. And so if you can write an email, you can learn how to use them very easily. Don't be afraid of it. Likewise, websites, many of the website programs now are pretty easy to work with. I have not done any on WordPress, but I've heard very good things about WordPress. I haven't done a website for probably 10 years now, but it is something, there are tutorials, again, that help you learn how to do it. And a lot of it is, if you can copy and paste, you can put it into these already created templates, and it's a done deal. So these things are not as daunting as we think they are. If you can email, if you can copy and paste, if you've ever done a PowerPoint, you can probably do all these things, particularly since you can use the tutorials.
I do think you're right. I think that they have kind of a aura about them that, oh my God, this is a big deal to do, but it's actually not so bad. One of our questions was with regard to financial abilities, knowing about how to do financial, I don't know, documents or lists, that may be a challenging thing to jump into if you haven't had some experience with that in the past. Do you have any thoughts about financial roles, or also who does the appointing on these appointed positions you've mentioned? How does that, is that a committee that does that, or how does that work?
Okay, we'll start with the financial. I like to say, if you can balance your checkbook, you can probably handle AAUW branch finances. The caveat to that is there are some IRS forms that are required, and you'll probably need somebody to help you with those. Usually the state finance person, my experience is that usually the state finance, VP of finance or finance director, can hold provide opportunities for branch finance directors to learn how to do those forms.
I hear
And
you.
we're
Using state
hoping
resources is a
using
resource that
state,
should do.
absolutely, use your
Got
state
it.
resources.
Got it.
Who appoints or elects? Okay, nominations is usually an ad hoc committee. Ad hoc or special committee simply means it's a committee struck to do a particular task, and it's done when it has completed its task. So nominations, in the way that it's designed in Robert's Rules of Order, and I'm not saying you have to be rigidly locked into Robert's, I'm a parliamentarian, so therefore I think in those terms.
That's your thing. Yeah.
But nominations is an ad hoc committee. The committee comes together, it's appointed or elected by the members or the board, as your bylaws state. They come together, they identify people and get the at least one candidate for every position, hopefully. And then they present their report at an annual meeting or whatever meeting you have defined in your bylaws as when your election will happen. And when they've presented their report, they're done. In many organizations, the nominating committee comes together 2 months before the election, and then they're done. So again, this is a short-term project. You can usually get people to take on those short-term projects, and
Okay.
your bylaws should detail how you elect and appoint people to different jobs. When you are thinking about right-sizing your structure, you also need to think about how you're going to amend your bylaws to accomplish that right-sizing of your structure.
So what I hear you saying is committees and ad hoc committees and some more short-term thing rather than two-term positions that people hold
Yeah,
for a longer position, and that speeds things up and allows things to happen more fluidly.
and it allows people who are really busy to envision participating. I can't commit to being with you for a 3-hour board meeting once a month and a 3-hour general membership meeting, but I can commit to 2 weeks of work in February to contact members and identify who can be leaders for our next year.
Right.
I can't commit to all of those board meetings, but I can commit to making sure the book sale happens when it needs to happen.
I hear you. I hear you.
Okay.
We are kind of down to the end of it, but I do have one question that came through that I am interested to hear what you think, particularly because you were the Canadian Federation of University Women. This person, Afton Reed, is from Geneva for 20 years and was member of the International Federation of University Women, and is kind of wondering why there doesn't seem to be any link between these international.
So, right. Okay. So AAUW, the British Federation of University Women, they had graduate women, I guess they were called at the time, and CFUW were actually the founding members of IFUW.
Ah,
They came together because they wanted to promote understanding from people among people of different cultures and prevent wars. They were a post-World War I group that wanted
wow.
to prevent wars, wanted to
Wow.
promote peace. AAUW was their largest federation or association, and 10, 11 years ago, I was not yet a member of AAUW at the time. It was determined that the cost benefit of participation in IFUW was not there for AAUW, and that it would be in their interest to do international activities through their own auspices rather than through the IFUW auspices, and they severed that link.
I'll be darned.
There is a group in the US, Graduate Women USA, who are mostly former AAUW and current AAUW members, who are members of what is now called Graduate Women International. So IFUW changed their name a few years ago. And I can get you links for that. I didn't come prepared, but I can get you
No,
links
I
for
just think that's so
request.
interesting. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so it is bittersweet that AAUW is no longer linked with IFUW, but there were appropriate reasons for that withdrawal.
Right, right. Well, I'm sorry, we still have one question left. I'm gonna postpone that one. Maybe we can come back to it, but I feel like we're at the mark where we need to move on. And Beth, I just want to thank you for opening up this. I think this has been kind of had a lot of people wondering about how this all works and how you get committees to do things and how you get a chairperson for that and how you do all this. But I think that once we get into it, we will begin to see what the potential is, what we can have our group think differently. Let go of the past a little bit and see if we can think differently about how we structure the future. So I want to thank you absolutely for all of your comments today. And if you have one last thing you want to add, that'd be great, but I'm going to go ahead and send us to the break if not.
I would just say that I've put my email address in the chat, and if you have questions, feel free to send me an email.
That would be great. Perfect. Thank you so much.